Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Irene Gao. I'm the Executive Director of Courage California, and I want to welcome you to Safety for All, our Protecting California's Progress virtual town hall on public safety. So thank you all for joining us. Hope you guys are staying cool. I know it's been pretty warm throughout the state. Um, so today we've got a great lineup of speakers that I'm really excited to have a great conversation with. Um, Today we wanted to have this town hall for a couple of reasons. We have a couple big decision points or advocacy points right now with state leaders deciding both on critical state policies as well as budgets. And that also includes local and federal budgets as well. But also because this is a really important time for us to do some reflection. We are at the point where we have just marked the 5th anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, which galvanized a movement for reforms and brought greater attention to the broken status quo, but also was part of a movement that had been going on for decades, and a movement that California that has been on the front lines of in terms of uh, finding solutions for public safety and pushing on reforms that became sort of the standard for the rest of the nation. But it's also a really fascinating time because for the last few years, state leaders and the media have been really hyper focused on crime and public safety. And we've also seen during the same time that crime rates have gone down. Um, and so it has brought us to a point where it really is critical for us to think about what really works in terms of public safety, what really keeps us safe, and what are the key investments and policies that we need in order to continue our progress and also defend against some of the attacks that we continue to see throughout these last few years. I also want to note too that on the more, again, those challenges that we're facing, we're still seeing a lot of law enforcement disproportionately target people of color, immigrants, especially at this time. Still a lot of overpolicing and over incarceration, and we're seeing that especially ramp up under this federal administration and its attacks on communities. We also are seeing a lot of cuts to programs and the services that we know work. So cuts to victim services, cuts to programs that prevent crime and that keep people housed and stable. And we're also seeing now, as I mentioned, elected officials needing to make really hard choices as we face budget deficits about where to invest and where to cut some of their funding. So again, this is a really critical time to reflect on both where we are as a movement, but what are the key things that we can be doing right now to ensure that we keep pushing on the progress that we've made. So today I'm really excited to have a conversation with several of Courage California's partners and lead thinkers in this field. So people have been pushing reforms and pushing on positive changes and have, I think, to me, very specific and important insights for us to reflect on this evening. So tonight we'll be hearing from 3 speakers. I'm really pleased to say that we'll be hearing from Contra Costa District Attorney Diana Becton. We'll also be hearing from Tamisha Walker Torres from Safe Return Project and also a member of the Antioch City Council. And we also have with us Claire Simonich from Vera, California as well. So Claire, Diana, and Tamisha, if you could join me, we'll get started with this conversation. Um, so first, let's get into the quick introductions. Just give us a sense of, tell us about your organizations, who you are, and your role in advocating for and implementing public safety and criminal justice reforms. And Dia Becton, if you want to start.
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and good to be here. And thanks so much for hosting this program so we can have this really important conversation. So, the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office, of course, is the chief prosecutorial agency in Contra Costa County, and we're responsible for enforcing the state and local criminal laws. Um, not only prosecuting crimes and protecting victims, but also working in different ways to enhance public safety. So, I mean, our key functions would be the normal things that you can think of, like prosecution, victim advocacy, and investigations as well. But the district attorney has a major role because we really are pivotal in terms of our leadership in shaping what justice looks like and how it's administered for Contra Costa County. And so that gives us an opportunity to be a leader in policy and reform implementation, setting priorities that focus on a high priority on violent crimes, but also focusing on off ramps for other categories. And then also making sure that we have a lens of fairness and equity and that we're concentrating on racial and social equity, as well as building trust with our community. So, those would be our major roles. We have a major impact because prosecutors can have an influence on what is charged and who is charged and how cases are disposed, sentencing outcomes, etc. And so we have a real opportunity to create change in the criminal justice system.
Thank you, Becton. Tamisha.
Hello, Tamisha Torres Walker. My preferred pronouns are she, her, Aya, Executive Director, co founder of Safe Return Project. Our mission at Safe Return is to end mass incarceration and mass criminalization of individuals in our community. And the way we do this work is through grassroots organizing, participatory research strategies, and policy advocacy to one, level the playing field, but also think deeply about clear justice reinvestment strategies that can make our communities safe. And so, what we deeply invest in is the healing and transformation of individuals historically who have experienced poverty, trauma, and essentially been victims themselves, and then as a result, ended up in the criminal legal system with no other supports. I'm also on the Antioch City Council, first elected in 2020. I'm in my second term right now, and my goal at the council level related to continuing to reimagine public safety in the city of Antioch is really encouraging us as elected leaders on these bodies who have a lot of power around budgets and also policies that impact the daily lives of our residents. Is how do we think deeply about our reimagining public safety strategies? How do we invest in areas that will actually get out ahead of harm before it happens and resource communities who have been grossly under resourced in a way that's healing and not disenfranchising?
Thank you, Tamisha. And I want to say too, while we have had some folks who have been activists and organizers run for elected office and get into it, I feel like it's still rare enough. So it's really unique and I think wonderful to have somebody who has been working at the grassroots level, work and govern with that specific lens. And I definitely would love to hear if you have any sort of insights or thoughts on sort of that transition for you as well.
I think I don't feel like it was as hard of a transition because I didn't run to be a politician. I got tired of begging politicians who didn't like were either too far disconnected from the community and the day-to-day struggle of our people, as well as some politicians who don't really care about that because they don't stay in our neighborhoods. And so I really just ran to stop violence in my neighborhood. And I knew that the people in these elected positions were pretty silent on the issue. And I had a lot of support from the community. So I wasn't elected to be a career politician. I was elected to make change. And even if that meant that I could be a one-term candidate, we were willing to take that risk. That we needed to move fast, we needed to be proactive, we needed to be strategic, and that the city needed a morally balanced budget that reflected our values around reimagining public safety. And so it wasn't as hard of a transition because I feel like I'm just organizing within this like political arena using some of the same strategies from our communities. The biggest challenge is that it's often not bureaucracy or red tape that I'm finding out that holds up progress for communities. Is really personalities. And so trading votes and all of these other things. So you really have to hold on to your morality, is what I'm finding. And the only way I'm able to do that is if I keep organizing in the community while I'm also in this space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Claire, I'd love for you if you could introduce yourself and Vera, California as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me. I'm Claire Simonich, she, her pronouns. I'm the Associate Director of Vera, California, which is a local initiative of the Vera Institute of Justice. I'm honored to be here with these two amazing panelists and to be learning alongside you and speaking about what we can do to keep our community safe. But to say a little bit about Vera and my work at Vera, Vera's mission is to end mass incarceration, to protect immigrant communities, and to promote racial justice in the criminal legal system. As the local initiative of Vera in California, we're based in Los Angeles, and we work both in LA and across the state to build safe and healthy communities through policy advocacy, a lot of data-driven research, and messaging guidance and narrative change. And it's really important to us to work not only with great government partners like the folks on this panel, but also grassroots partners who, to Tamisha's point, can keep pushing and uplifting and connecting to the community and making sure that those voices are heard. Just to talk through a little bit of our sort of recent work to give a little bit more context to what we're doing here to keep communities safe in California. We have done a lot of work to hold LA County to its commitment to close the deadly and dangerous men's central jail in Los Angeles without a replacement, through decarceration, through diversion, and through building up things like mental health beds and housing that we know are what our communities need and will keep our communities safe. We've done a lot of supporting the field, including lots of folks here tonight, with messaging guidance around pushing back against some of these tough on crime policies that we've seen, including things like Prop 36, tough retail theft laws, and other things. And we also try to help build solutions that we think will promote and that the research shows will promote safe and healthy communities. So things like connecting folks with good jobs so they don't end up in the criminal legal system in the first place, and looking at why folks are committing felonies in the first place. Is it poverty? Is it mental health issues? Is it something that would be better addressed through behavioral health care? And we work very hard to promote funding the services and programs that we know will keep our communities safe and will give our communities what they're asking for and what they deserve. But thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to getting into it with you all.
Thank you, Claire. So this is a question for all of you. As I mentioned, the 5th anniversary of George Floyd's murder, a lot of folks have been reflecting on the progress that we've made since. And also how much seems to have been undone in that same period of time. So can you share with us sort of some of your reflections on sort of where we're at, both in terms of progress and sort of the pushback and the challenges that we've seen? And Dia Becton, if you'd like to start.
Sure. So, and as you mentioned, like 5 years ago, the murder of George Floyd really shook the nation and I'd really say the world. And so it forced, I think, everybody to confront the painful and persistent reality of systemic racism in our justice system, and really sparked a nationwide call for accountability, for equity, and for change. And so, as the elected district attorney, I remember that moment so vividly when people in every corner of this country stood up to say enough. And I think it was really a message to those of us in positions of power. It was a moment for deep reckoning and responsibility. I would say that in Contra Costa County, since then, we have made some meaningful strides. We've really worked to make sure that we have a lot of transparency around releasing public information whenever there is an officer involved in a fatal incident in our county. So we first decided that it was important to release public reports. So whenever an officer wasn't charged, that, you know, the public would be able to see our decision making. And people deserve to know how justice is administered. And while we know people may not agree with every decision that we make, we still are bringing sunlight to the decisions that used to happen in the dark, because those reports were never prepared or issued before. We've worked on accountability. Of course, we won the first conviction of an on-duty officer for taking the life of an unarmed, mentally ill motorist. And that's the same for other public officials as well, because we believe that no one is above the law. And we've made it clear that those in positions of trust who abuse their power and break the law are going to be held accountable just like everybody else. We really enhanced our protocols around investigating these incidents, and we've made sure that their politics are taken out of our investigations and replaced with professionalism and consistency and transparency. Of course, we banned the use of cardiac holds by my investigative teams, and then we've launched so many opportunities for alternatives to incarceration, which I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about. Recently, we've implemented race-blind charging in our office so that the initial filing decisions, when they're made without any reference to neighborhood or race or names and that kind of thing that could identify a person's ethnicity. And then those initial charging decisions are made. And but I would say that I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that much of the energy for that reform that we felt in 2020 has now, started to meet a lot of resistance around the country. And really a backlash, if you will, calls to go back to what was the status quo that never really served all communities equally. And so some reforms, true, have been rolled back and some voices have been silenced. And in many places, the movement for justice has been politicized and undermined. And so I'd say that for this anniversary, it's not just a time for us to remember, but it's also a time for us to call for renewal so that the legacy of George Floyd is not measured solely in policies that were passed or just in protest, but we have to be measured by the courage that we show in continuing this work, even when it's hard and even when the momentum wanes. And so I remain committed to the vision of public safety that values every life and seeks truth over expediency and puts our community at the center of our justice system. The work is far from over, but I think we're on the right path, and together we're going to honor George Floyd's not just with words, but also with our actions.
Thank you, DA Becton. And I want to mention too, because you and I have had conversations over the years, and it's always been really clear to me that you've always approached how you've governed in this office, both in terms of engaging communities very directly in sort of the solutions that you're putting forth through your office, as well as really being up on research on understanding what really works, what has shown has really helped both in terms of improving public safety and also helping, as you said, like folks who are re-entering and also preventing people from getting into the system in the first place. And I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that as well.
Well, sure. I mean, one of the things that we try to do in terms of our policy work is making sure that we're kind of closing, I'd say on the front end, just sort of giving opportunities for off-ramps so that people are not entering the criminal justice system. And then on the back end, making sure that we are cooperating, especially with our community partners, on programs for reentry, because people are coming home, right, back to our communities. And we need to make sure that we have, at least to the best of our ability, offered the tools that will assist them in coming home. And so on the front end, I would say we started with our juveniles getting the first grant for our county to be able to offer a restorative justice diversion program. And that has been going very well. We're in our 4th year of that program. We've just recently secured funding for our TAY youth. So now we'll be able to extend those restorative justice practices to those who are 18 to 25-year-old. And the really good news is with our adult diversion program. It's really neighborhood partnership where people from the community come and train in restorative justice practices. They sit as panelists in their own communities to resolve cases, making the victim whole, but also getting to the root cause of why the person committed the crime. And to date, we've had 250 graduates, and we are so pleased to say that not one person has recidivated, meaning every graduate that has gone through our program has been crime-free. And so we're really proud. That's how we know that the reforms are working. And in the midst of all of this, the crime continues to go down in Contra Costa County. And then on the other end, we certainly are participating in the prosecutor-initiated resentencing program. We partner with the community organization there. For the people, making sure that we're going back and taking a look at those old draconian sentences where which no longer serve the interests of justice. So we like to say that as prosecutors, we get to be right twice, right in the beginning to hold a person accountable, but now understanding that those certain sentences that are just not in step with the kind of policies that we and programs that we have today. And we've been able to bring people home who have been in prison for a really long time. Their rehabilitation, we've taken into account so many different things, but it's really great to see them come home and flourish in our communities. And then always working with our community partners. There's our accountability table so that we do hear from those in our community about the priorities that the community has around public safety, because who knows better, right? And so we want to make sure that those voices are always heard and valued and lifted up in our decision making.
Thank you, DA Becton. Tamisha, I have that same question to you. What is your reflection on where we're at in terms of progress and the pushback on progress as well? And I'd love to hear that, both as a constituent or, somebody who's working in the same county as DA Becton, but, somebody who also has to govern in these environments as the mood or the interest in certain things changes.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think reflecting what it made me think of is like I've been involved in this work for 16 years, right? And so if we start at George Floyd, we're kind of starting at the straw that broke the camel's back. When I think about this, I think about Trayvon Martin and teaching that documentary and showing it in community and to our leaders and to our folks who are organizing, reminding them about Trayvon Martin and like not just how systems of policing, but just like this whole ideology and framework around policing dark bodies, no matter where we are or who it is kind of acceptable, as well as Mike Brown and, Breonna Taylor and, it's Tamir Rice. It's like if we started George Floyd, we're starting at the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's kind of what I've been reflecting on is how much trauma and hard work it took to get to the point where the death of another human from our community really pushed us into a point to hold systems accountable. But we also have to reflect on that we were in a global pandemic, right? And so there was like really nowhere for us to go, nowhere for our politicians to go. So we were stuck with each other, right? And we were going to make some change. And when I think about, not just at that point, because people started fighting early on, around criminal legal reform. There are people whose shoulders I stand on today, ban the box policies, trying to create avenues and opportunities for access to housing and voting rights and all of that stuff, early release and like getting people clemency, that work has been going on, right? Just at a and nationally and at a smaller scale. And just at a time when we were all started to collectively come together and understand that we don't have to suffer in this alone, and that we could collectively challenge the criminal legal system, not just locally, but at a national level. And also philanthropy coming along, right? And so just doing that, understanding just my own little historical trajectory to this work helps me also understand like how we got to where we are today, why Proposition 36 happened, why politicians are backtracking to tough on crime narratives, just the blatant disregard for practices that have worked, best practices that we have seen reduce violence in our community, having non-police responses being successful, all of these things that we just started to see the fruits of our labor. And then we have politicians backtracking and government saying that they're facing grave deficits and they need to start cutting. And what they do, what happens, what I say what happens in government is when you cut the people first. You don't cut from the top, you cut from the bottom. And so what I'm seeing just in a electoral space is saying like, every city is facing a deficit, and the only way we're going to get through a deficit is if we cut critical resources and responses to community things that we've invested in that we know work, in order to salvage salaries, is something that is very challenging. Also, not addressing that like some cities were just coming out of a recession and then immediately after going into a pandemic, and revenues not rebounding in a way that we thought that they would, right? And so it's all this crisis surrounding us, and in order to address the crisis, we turn to the carceral state. We went backwards. And so what I'm thinking is that, you know, we the city of Richmond, when we had violence, our highest rate of violence was retaliatory violence, which is why I was happy to hear DA Becton announce that they're going to be looking into unsolved homicides, because we stopped trusting policing a long time ago, right? To show up for us, to protect us, to serve us, all of the great things that we said. Most communities like the city of Richmond, they used to have 45 to 75 homicides a year, stop believing in policing to address our needs a long time ago. And then we invested in 10 City. We invested in the ONS. We have organizations like Rodney Alamo's Soulful Softball Sunday, bringing community together and trying to show our local governmental leaders what it really takes to have healthy and safe communities. Right now, I see the backtrack politically, but I don't see the backtrack on the ground. I just think that we need to get back to deep relationship in our community and protect everything we can while we can.
Thank you, Tamisha. I think you bring up a really good point, which is a lot of the work that went into this movement was really not visible to a whole lot of people, but the work was happening on the ground. But also, similarly, a lot of the stuff that deeply affects public safety is also stuff that doesn't receive a whole lot of visibility. So people see the police, they want to see these solutions that are just a lot more evident, when a lot of the times it's the stuff that goes unseen or people don't understand is just as important to public safety. That's important too. And for me, Claire, that's a good segue to you as well. I'd love to get your thoughts, because I know that Vera has always had a very similar to DA Becton and Tamisha, like very holistic approach to public safety as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of what Tamisha was mentioning is really exactly on point here. Part of what we have seen in the past 5 years as a result of not just the pandemic, but also disinvestment in some of the systems that we know work to keep our communities safe and thriving, and also technological changes, increased reliance on online retailers, fewer people shopping in their local stores, fewer people walking around, young people feeling disengaged since the pandemic. there are a number of factors that have happened since 2020 that are making it harder for people to feel like their communities are safe, even if the data shows time and time and time again that the policies that we are finally making some progress on implementing, alternative crisis response, diversion policies, mental health care, those things are working to reduce crime rates. Crime rates are going down. The data is showing that, but people don't feel it. And they don't feel it because they're looking around and seeing garbage in the streets, and they're not seeing streetlights invested in, and they're not seeing grass cut in the cities. They're seeing things that make them feel unsafe. Partner that with a media market that's quite challenging for many reasons I'm happy to talk about. And folks aren't going to listen to the data, and they're not going to hear the numbers that we all know to be true. Crime is down. So what we hear from voters time and time again when we poll them at Vera Action, our sister organization, is that people want to live in communities. They want to have affordable housing. They want to have good jobs. And those are the solutions that they want their politicians to invest in. They want people to have access to mental health care, drug treatment, very specific things that the research shows work and that we're not seeing enough investment in. And part of the problem is that much of our leadership, when they get attacked on not being tough enough on crime, when they see media messages about the need to be tough on crime, they're not responding with what voters want to hear. What voters want to hear and see is, here are specific ways in which I'm going to invest in this community to make sure that there are walkable streets, that the parks have good lighting, and that people can go to them day and night. And they're not seeing that, and they're not hearing the politicians give that messaging. And so many of our leaders instead, unfortunately, just give the, I'm also tough on crime, or they stay silent. And so I do think that a really important piece of this puzzle is both the policy of investing in what we know voters want, really fully funding things like drug treatment, voluntary drug treatment up and down the spectrum, but also talking about what you're doing and telling voters that's what you're doing. Tout your successes. These things work. Voters want to hear it, and they want to hear the ways in which these things are specific solutions to some of the challenges that folks do see, some of which are driven by post-pandemic factors, technological changes, and all sorts of challenges that folks are facing these days.
Thank you, Claire. That it's helps to paint a sort of bigger picture of it all. I'm also curious. So, you mentioned like people want to hear specifics, because I also, from Courage's own sort of research and understanding of things, we also hear very much the same thing, which is voters really understand that public safety is a complex issue. It takes a network of programs and services and investments to really make it work. And people, like you said, really gravitate towards prevention, treatment, a lot of the things that we know people need and that are good for public safety, but also good for justice, good for equity, right? Again, these are the basic things that we know work across the board. But again, you mentioned like people want to hear specific reforms or specific policies. So I'm wondering if you could talk about what do you feel like is some of the immediate policies or reforms that we have in front of us that people could really be helping to advocate for or really push for?
Absolutely. So I'll give 3 things. I think one is consistently and repeatedly pushing for funding, in particular drug treatment, behavioral health care and drug treatment, state funding, county funding, local funding for voluntary treatment, for outpatient treatment, for inpatient treatment. We know, for example, from things like Prop 36, where voters were misled to believe that this thing would give people treatment. Voters want treatment for people who are struggling with drugs, and voters know that's what works. There have been a number of advocacy efforts this year to push the state legislature, the governor, and all sorts of counties across the state to invest in drug treatment. And I want to encourage everybody to continue to push that. We need to be funding voluntary drug treatment so that everybody who's struggling with an opiate addiction, everybody who's struggling with fentanyl, everybody who's at risk for overdose has access to the kind of treatment that works. Second bucket I'll mention goes to some of the policies DA Becton was mentioning. Once somebody is unfortunately involved in the criminal legal system, we know that it would be great for judges to have better alternatives to offer folks instead of solely incarceration. And so alongside an amazing coalition that includes SEIU, PICO California, the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership, which is a group of over 100 service providers who provide this kind of drug treatment every single day in Los Angeles County, as well as the Drug Policy Alliance and the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. Vera is working to pursue a bill called the Safer Communities Through Opportunities Act. It will give judges in California more options to offer people the ability to participate in these types of programs and services that have been proven time and time again to be not only popular with voters, but they also work. They're twice as effective at keeping our communities safe and reducing rearrest. And that bill just passed out of the assembly last night, and we're continuing to pursue it. We've got an exciting coalition and look forward to hopefully having folks support when it gets into the second house. And the third policy I'll mention that I think should really increasingly be a part of our conversation, and I look forward to advocating for as well, is that I think workforce development is really a part of the solution here. Vera has been working locally and in the state to pursue what we're calling the Jails to Job budget request, which would fund jobs, services training, job skills training, and connecting folks who might be in the criminal legal system solely because of poverty, solely because of lack of access to good jobs, to the type of job skills training that will help people avoid what got them in trouble in the first place. If we can invest in connecting people to good paying jobs, I think we can solve a lot of problems in California. And we've received a lot of support and enthusiasm for this budget request, both in the state and locally. And I do think that workforce development, connecting folks to jobs, is a really important piece of the puzzle for so many Californians who are struggling to make ends meet right now.
Thank you, Claire. I'd love to hear, Tamisha, from you as well. Like, what do you sort of see as effective state and local policies and reforms that that folks can really engage on and really push for right now?
That's a big, big question. I mean, personally, I agree with everything that Claire had to say as far as the state level. I think we could push. This is my position. We can push as many policies as we would like, and sometimes our intent and how it's rolled out and the implementation and making sure that people feel the effects of these policies have been the challenge. Not getting the policies passed, right? Like you get it, we get it. Well, in the past, it wasn't that hard. Right now, you battling with people who thinking about their reelection, right? So I get that, but I think getting the policies in, making sure that there's effective implementation, that you at the table of implementation, making sure that evaluation and oversight is critical, and making sure that like the data is being collected around impact, but also making sure that that information about the access to alternatives to incarceration, the access to behavioral health and drug treatment, that the workforce development strategies that play out at the local level, the community need to be informed and backing that up, and also holding local leaders accountable to those outcomes. And so I can't think really of any other policies at the state level. All I can think about is the strategy of how we can get to what Claire mentioned about, yes, the data says that crime is down, but people don't feel like it, right? And it's hard to manage feelings, but it's even harder in the realm of criminal legal reform at the state level, because we passed was it Proposition 17, so people could be able to vote even if they were on parole, but I was still talking to people on parole who didn't know they could vote, right? So I think kind of how do we connect the political statewide work with the grass level work to inform our communities about these opportunities to make sure that we do produce the outcomes that we believe will happen. And I think the only reason why some folks get to say it don't work is because we have our communities often go uninformed that they exist in the first place. And that's a big challenge. I think for the local context, I think people should just continue to fight to sustain the work of justice reinvestment strategies, continue to hold our electeds' feet to the fire around morally balanced budgets, making sure that there are participatory budgeting practices in every community, where every community is informed and understands the budget and how our cities are funded and what those funds could be used for, and influence how they should be used in our communities, and to really just like get deeply and civically involved in the rollout of those things with all of the impending cuts that's coming.
Thank you, Tamisha. I mean, you remind me of a couple of things, which is that sometimes there's so much attention and energy put towards passing good policies, but sort of implementing them and making sure that they take hold and they best serve the communities that they were intended is sort of, to me, that's also a lot of work that's not necessarily visible, but really necessary. And to me, that's also a good reminder of, again, like these big wins and gains that we've made in the last few years that we still have to make good on to make sure that it's, again, like it achieves what they were intended to. I'm also curious too, I mean, as a city council member, you are voting on a budget each year. You have also had and played a role in ensuring that the budget, like you said, is more moral and it better reflects alternatives to incarceration and policing that work. So like alternative responses to police. I'm wondering if you could also talk to some of those too, like what are some of the factors that you have to really grapple with and really work with activists in terms of thinking about something like a local budget?
Yeah, what I do is talk with the community about what's at risk. Okay, first we figure out what did we win, how long did it take to get there, and what's at risk now, and how do we need to position ourselves to protect as much as we can. With me understanding that like it's an inside outside strategy, and how do I find alignment internal to this governmental institution while also finding alignment in the community. We are going to keep our police commission, right? The civilian police oversight commission, that is going to stay. Our Angelo Quinto crisis response team, that is going to stay in place. One of the ways that is able to stay in place is that it's legislated, right, in our stipulated agreement with the Department of Justice. My thinking is that if it wasn't required for us to do it, to escape federal oversight, then our current council would be looking to chop those things from the budget, right? And so we're safe for now, but they're also discussing cutting the budget for that, taking it from 24-hour service to half the rate of service to build while also building up the police department. The apprenticeship program that was created for young people who are impacted by gun violence and also incarceration in our city, creating job opportunities within the city for them while also working with a local organization to do life skills management and help them be able to make better decisions, while they also had this great opportunity that could lead to other job opportunities moving forward. Bringing down 1.9 million of CalVIP dollars to finally start addressing gun violence in the city of Antioch, which we know it works, right? It's a national model, if not a global model, around how do we reduce violence by actually investing deeply in people and getting at the root of trauma and how violence happens in our community, while investing in those folks to have alternatives to what they've been doing. Antioch has never done that before. And so bringing those dollars in, creating a Department of Public Safety and Community Resources that has environmental justice in it, that has housing access in it, that houses our CDBG funding, that houses the work around violence prevention, also houses the work around youth development, and deep investment in our young people, all under one umbrella of public safety, because those things exist in the realm of public safety. We don't talk about public safety like that. When I'm thinking about how do we as community work together to keep these things in place, is the only thing that's saving us really now is that this new department has brought in $10 million of outside funding to keep these things going, so it's not all tied to the general fund, right? The department in itself only takes up 2 to 4% of the general fund itself. So what I have to do is help my colleagues at the council understand that this particular department and the strategies that we're implementing around public safety are only taking up 4% of the general fund. So how could we imagine making cuts there, but also bringing in over $10 million of outside dollars to do this work? And a lot of the programs were established through American Rescue Plan Act funding, because we know that these things aren't sustainable with general fund dollars alone in cities who are struggling with like low projections for revenue. And I have conversations like this with the community to help them understand what is our priority. If we can't save everything, what are the things that we just cannot do without? And then how do we imagine getting everything back to where we want it to be, through strategy and organizing?
Thank you, Tamisha. Really quickly, I do want to remind folks too, apologies, we are going to have time for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for any of our panelists, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom to add your questions, and we'll make sure that we will try to get to them as well. DA Becton, you talked a lot about some of the accomplishments and this, but I also want to remind folks, I mean, the office that you'd run is significant. It's really large. So the reforms that you make there have a lot of implications for the county because you are changing a whole system. And so the changes that you make, we hope that we see like long-term impacts of that. But you're also talking about how you've seen some immediate changes in some of those reforms as well. And so I'm curious to hear from you also sort of what would you tell folks as they think about advocating for things in the budget and how to sort of think about approaching advocacy to ensure that reforms and changes are made at the bigger level, and as Tamisha mentioned, are also like being invested in long term, so not just because it's politically popular or expedient, but that it's going to be something that has a little bit more duration to it as well.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is we're working with our community and lifting our voices in unison about things that we know actually work, like prevention, like treatment and reentry services, restorative practices. All of these things are effective in reducing crime. And I guess one of the things that we have to do is, as Tamisha mentioned as well, is making sure that people understand the that we can go forward with one voice really to really lift up those things that we know work and that we know produce safer communities. One of the things that we've seen, because there's really this tension too as well, when we think about public safety and justice, because on the one hand, people want safe communities and they want accountability when there's any harm that occurs. But on the other hand, there's also recognition that when we have over-policing, when we have mass incarceration and racially biased systems, that those things have harmed and continue to harm our communities, especially communities of colors. And so, we have to balance those two truths that kind of sit side by side. And I think as we're trying to build stronger communities, we have to figure out, what that balance is. We saw, for example, with the passage of Prop 36, and I've taken a tremendous amount of heat for being in opposition to Prop 36, but my opposition was really based on the fact that there was a lack of funding. Proposition 36 was basically promoted in our public arena as something that was going to offer treatment for those who were suffering from addiction and also were unhoused. But there was literally no money that was provided. It was going to be an unfunded and is an unfunded mandate. And so when you think about the fact that we have 58 counties in California and 22 of them have not a single treatment bed at all, it means that we're going to be right back to where we were decades ago when we are using the tool of punishment to try to cure things like addiction. And so I think we have to really concentrate on those things that work in our community, like housing, like behavioral health and education and access to jobs, and have these the focus of not only the community, but those of us who are in leadership as well. And then making sure that we're kind of holding the line on that progress, that we're investing in programs that work and centering the voices of people that are most impacted in our community by our justice system. So, and I think Contra Costa County has a lot of really good examples of doing that kind of work and making sure that we are working together with our community to figure out what works well and what doesn't work and how we need to strategize to make sure that we keep those things that are working well and that are keeping our community safe in place.
Thank you, Dee Becton. So it's sort of a follow-up question to that. You had also talked about how you very directly get to see sort of the benefits or the positive change that comes from sort of these reforms. So sort of you mentioned the diversion programs or the apprenticeships, things that have directly translated to people rebounding, staying out of prison, staying out of the system. So sort of that, you know, in today's political environment, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of instability, especially coming from this federal administration. But what is sort of giving you hope for how California can continue to make progress on public safety?
Well, I would say that as we try to continue to support this work, you know, as a community, I think, first of all, everyone has to stay informed and we have to stay engaged. Local justice reform efforts, attending town halls and asking questions of elected officials, you know, people have to be visible and they have to stay engaged. And then I think we have to go to the polls. Like we have to vote with a value lens. And so, you know, policies that pass with, you know, unfunded mandates, those are good reminders of how important it is to vote not out of fear, but to vote out of facts and fairness. And so people need to be informed and making sure that they are engaged in the voting polls. And then community organizations really, especially in this time where so many organizations are losing funding on so many levels, we have to be able to help support and bolster those community organizations. They are doing a lot of heavy lifting, providing services and advocating for change and holding systems accountable. But in this climate, a lot of them are not going to make it unless we in our communities are lifting them up and making sure that we're supporting them as well. And then I think people, they got to speak up, right? You got to be at the school board meetings, you got to be at the neighborhood councils, at the city councils, at state hearings, because it is the voice of the people that matter. And sometimes public officials, you know, we forget this, but I know every day I work for the people. And so your voices are always important to inform the direction that we're going in and making sure that we are trying to build change that lasts for our communities.
Thank you, Dee Becton. Claire, so similar question to you, both what is giving you hope for us continuing to make progress, but what are also some of the top things you mentioned, the three, like that you really want folks in this town hall to really focus on, like to continue to keep pushing for change and to keep building on the gains that we've already made?
Yeah, absolutely. I was nodding very vigorously and excitedly at some of what DA Becton was saying, because I couldn't agree more that I think where I have the most hope is where I see folks directly engaging in large numbers, their elected officials. So I think, for example, I do a lot of work, state policy work in Sacramento. And so often we do that work in Sacramento, which is a very inaccessible place for folks who are most impacted by incarceration, especially those in Los Angeles, San Diego, large centers of incarceration and policing of communities of color. It is very hard for folks to go up to Sacramento and testify against a bill. However, every assembly member has a local office. And I'm really excited about the idea of folks showing up and continuing to do in-district mobilization. And we have some grassroots partners who do this across the state. And that is a strategy I'm excited to continue to work on and learn more about doing. And I think it's something that holds a lot of power. I think in those conversations, in showing up to local town halls, local in-district offices, to DA Becton's point, telling your local official, your elected officials what you want and what does make you feel safe and what doesn't make you feel safe, and making sure that they hear that loud and clear is very important, because otherwise they're going to get the phone call from their local law enforcement and that's all they will listen to. And so having folks show up at town halls and say, this streetlight on my block has been broken for 2 years and it is taking you too long to fix it, and I would like you to fix it, and that is what will make me feel safe as your voter, can be incredibly impactful. And then I'll just give a couple of examples of policies that I've found empowering and exciting and optimistic, notwithstanding the many, many challenges that we are seeing. There's been quite a bit of support, in some cases, unanimous support, bipartisan support, for a number of bills this year that are workforce development bills for folks in the criminal legal system. And in particular, the focus this year has been on incarcerated and formerly incarcerated firefighters, because I think many Californians before the LA wildfires did not know that so many of their communities were being kept safe by folks who were incarcerated. And so many folks do agree that this is a population that we should make sure can be connected to great jobs, great firefighting jobs when they get out. We need firefighters. That folks should have access to resentencing options, that folks should have access to fair pay, and all sorts of policies that will help keep our communities safe through good workforce. One of these, the first bill of these that was up for a hearing this year in Sacramento, had 60 plus people show up in the policy hearing, which never happens for a single bill, a single public safety bill. Bipartisan unanimous support. And so I think continuing to push for workforce development policies that are popular, that matter, that will help build the workforce that we need, and continuing to do some in-district direct to legislator mobilization, I find exciting and optimistic, and I hope we can harness some of that energy.
Thank you, Claire. That's really encouraging to hear about the testimonies. Tamisha, I was wondering if you could sort of close this out with your sort of thoughts on that as well. Sort of what is giving you hope in terms of us continuing to push for progress, and what are the ways, and again, that you really would encourage folks to keep on this work?
Yeah, I think what's giving me hope in this particular moment is just knowing that there's still momentum. There's still momentum in our communities to protect what we've built, but also to think about what's next, right? The vision around a just transition. We don't often talk enough about the correlation between environmental justice and incarceration. We don't talk enough about the correlation between economic dignity and incarceration via disenfranchisement, which is why we do need great workforce development strategies to allow people to have those onboardings into good high road jobs, those high road jobs that we're talking about now. And so what keeps me hopeful is knowing that we're all working together, even if we don't know it, and that at some point it will produce those real results for our community that we can feel. What like keeps me centered is the community members that show up every day to fight for the rights of unhoused folks, right? As somebody who was formerly in foster care, formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless, formerly on Section 8, formerly, like, all these collective experiences that we embody, but to see people showing up and saying, hey, homelessness is an issue, and that it's not enough to say you don't want to see people being unhoused. We need to make sure that we get people housed. And so seeing community having a clear analysis of what we can do and bringing those to us as not just elected leaders, but people in movement spaces so that we could collectively fight for those things. That's what gives me hope. I think the moment that we surrender is when I'll be thinking about moving to Ghana.
Don't go, Tamisha. I know Ghana's beautiful and it's wonderful. We still need you here, but I also know you put in a lot of work here.
Yeah, I think hopelessness is the point where we lose everybody.
Yeah.
I used to tell, I don't claim to be a youth justice organizer, but I'm a mom. And one of the things that I always say to people who are working in schools is that if you have a young person that's quite challenging, but they still showing up to school, that means they have hope. It's when they stop showing up that you need to be worried. And so I think as long as we keep showing up and I keep showing up and I keep seeing people, us collectively showing up like this and in the community, my hope is sustained. The moment we stop showing up is when I'll have great concern.
Thank you, Tamisha. I can't thank you and DA Becton and Claire enough. I know it's a really busy time because budget stuff is happening, policy stuff. There's just a lot happening right now. So really appreciate you all. It was, I think, building, Tamisha, on what you said, what sometimes I've been reflecting on too is I have to remind myself of this work has been happening a lot longer than people have maybe, like, that media has been paying attention to it. This work needs to continue and people are showing up. And even now, as we're facing the challenges under this federal administration, we're seeing people protest, turning out, being really against sort of this over policing and over incarceration, and seeing how law enforcement is being deployed against immigrants and folks from our community. But there is also a lot of hope. I mean, I was thinking about too how we've had a lot of wins really quickly in a short period of time. And so it can be really easy to lose sight about how much we've gained. But I think as also an indication of it, as we all talked about, we're seeing crime go down. And that is a direct result of the work that we've been doing and the reforms that we've been able to put in place. And so we know that that is working. And so we have to continue it on that to make sure that that trend continues. But I think, as a couple of you have mentioned, Claire and DA Becton too, right, with Prop 36, the folks who are pushing Prop 36 were also trying to really push it, but on our narrative terms. They were using the words that we usually use, like around treatment. And so last thing I'll mention too is they know that this is what works. As we all mentioned, folks in the community know that it is these holistic investments, these holistic programs and services that really best serve public safety. And it seems like there's been a consistency that people understand that whether or not they feel safe or whatever the political environment is, there is the steadiness and understanding again that public safety is something much more than policing and law enforcement, but that it includes housing. It includes all kinds of investments, like Claire was saying, in infrastructure, but also in everything that keeps people safe and healthy as well. So as folks have mentioned on this call, the most important thing is to keep showing up and staying engaged, because that's where we win. That's where we have to keep going, and that's where we have to keep this movement going. So again, Claire, DA Becton, and Tamisha, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to thank everyone who joined us for this public virtual town hall as well. We have a lot in front of us. We still have a lot of work to go, both in terms of getting new policies passed and more morally budgets passed. But we also have work to do in terms of implementing the good policies and budget that we have put in place now. But at the end of the day, as Tamisha said, this is really about showing up for each other, being in community and working together, because whether or not this work is visible or whether or not we even see each other doing this work, the fact that we're showing up day in and day out is what's important at the end of the day. So thank you all tonight. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for the work that you do. And again, let's keep showing up for each other. Thank you all so much.